Informed Choice Radio, episode 427, Quit Like a Millionaire, with Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung.
Recorded live from Cranley in Surrey. This is Informed Choice Radio. Want to make the most of your money and your life? You've come to the right place. Here at Informed Choice, we believe that when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow. Now, here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner, Martin Bamford.
My guests today are two leaders of the FIRE movement, that's Financial Independence Retire Early, and they've written a bold contrarian guide to retiring at any age. Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung are world-travelling early retirees. Their story has been featured in media outlets all over the world, including the New York Times, CBC, CNBC and The Independent. They now spend their time helping people with their finances and realising their travel dreams. In their book, Kristy and Bryce cover how to cut down on spending without decreasing your quality of life, build a $1 million portfolio, fortify your investments to survive bear markets and black-swan events, and use the 4% rule and the yield shield so you can quit the rat race forever. So here's my conversation with Kristy Shen and Bryce Leung, authors of Quit Like a Millionaire, in episode 427 of Informed Choice Radio. Okay, so perhaps the two of you could start by introducing yourself. Tell us a bit about who you are and what you do.
For sure. Okay, so I'm Kristy and
Bryce.
This is Bryce. So we're actually, we retired at the age of 31 and 32, and now we're on permanent vacation. So what that means is we've been traveling the world for the last 4 years. And so right now we write a blog called millennial-revolution.com. And we have a book coming out from Penguin on July 9th to talk about how we actually ended up here on this permanent vacation. So to give you a little bit of background, so originally we used to live in Toronto, Canada, one of the most expensive cities in Canada. And I'm sure a lot of your UK listeners will understand that the housing prices is one of the biggest struggles that we had back when we were living there. And so originally I was going down this normal path of, buy a house, according to my boss, buy the biggest house you could possibly afford, keep going until you're 65, pay off the mortgage, and then retire the normal way. So that was the original plan, except what ended up happening was the housing prices just kept going up and up and up. And the average, basically single home ended up being over $1 million. So it was around this time that we decided, I'm not sure if this is the right way to go. I also got really sick and tired of real estate agents seeing us walk into an open house, looking at us and going, can you afford this? Like, seriously? You look like you're friggin' 18 years old. So at that point, I decided, you know what? I'm not sure if I really want to go down this path. And then at the same time, my work was getting really stressful. So we both worked as computer engineers and in Toronto, and my work was getting stressful. There were people getting outsourced. And then at one point, one of my coworkers was so overworked that he collapsed and almost died at his desk. Wow. Like, this literally happened. Yeah. And they said that if the ambulance had come half an hour later, he would have been dead. So at this point, I started to really question this, this normal path of buying the biggest house you could afford, working until you're 65 and retiring. Because my first thought was, am I even going to be able to make it until 65? Which I don't suspect it's not going to happen. So then at that point, we started researching into, is there something else we can do besides buying a house? And then once we found out that investing is actually the way to go, we divested the money that we would have put into a down payment into building a portfolio instead. And then lo and behold, just 3 years later, we were actually able to retire at the ages of early 30s, and then we've been traveling the world ever since.
And this story you tell is, I guess, almost a response to modern living and the pressures we face, the financial pressures we face, and it's what prompts a lot of people to explore what's become known as the FIRE movement. So, do you identify with the FIRE movement? Is this something you sort of see yourselves as part of?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we first started off, it wasn't really a movement. It was just a bunch of weirdos who had attempted to do this early retirement thing, and basically a bunch of money nerds who like to geek out over spreadsheets. Over time, there became more and more people like us that were coming online and talking about how we did it, how this other person did it, and we were all coming at it from different backgrounds, different directions, and different methods. And then at that point, we started, and because the original guy that did this was Mr. Money Mustache, and it has a kind of a persona of just be frugal, live in the woods, and if you don't like it, I'm going to punch you in the face, which is great. That's his thing. But other people started coming along like us who, didn't decide to live in the woods or even live all that frugally. And we decided to start, just traveling the world. And we've been doing it continuously ever since. And other people who did it with like real estate investing, and then other people who did it with, like more active, like other types of investment strategies and this kind of stuff. But we all kind of managed to pull it off together, but in different ways, but adapting it for different, some people did it with families, people did it in the military, some people did it that kind of stuff. And then it really started to become a movement. And I think it was really just like this year where it started to really become like a cohesive movement, because we went from a bunch of weirdo bloggers and we've been, and individually we've been kind of breaking out into other media. So for example, we have, as we mentioned, a book coming out with Penguin. A few other people also have books coming out. It's still not that common, but there's also, in the UK, there's a movie coming out as well. There's going to be the premiere in London in a few weeks. It's called Playing with Fire, and we're in it. So it's like it's all these different types of the messaging is starting to grow and really is starting to coalesce into a movement, and it's really exciting thing to be about. Because the problem is there's so many people that whine and bitch at millennials about saying we're lazy, we're narcissistic, and we're not, like, we flip between jobs and we don't want to grow up in this kind of stuff. And it's like, we're not doing that on purpose, right? We don't do that because we want to. The jobs just aren't stable anymore. And what I guess our parents and the last generation still has trouble recognizing is that the tactics that work for them don't really work for us anymore. And FIRE is like the ultimate kind of flexible way of, like, it's a way of kind of taking stability and then building it yourself. In a sort of way, we are kind of building our own pension and making it so that we don't have to rely on an employer anymore. Like, this whole thing was born out of financial instability. I mean, like, we're doing this because we have to, because we can't trust the government, we can't trust an employer to provide the stability for us. So we did it ourselves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You said something a moment ago about you've almost approached the FIRE movement in a slightly different way to most people. You haven't been as frugal maybe as others may have been. So what does that? How important is frugality when we're talking about financial independence?
Well, the interesting thing is, like, I actually grew up from a background in China, in rural China. In which we didn't have a lot of money. Like, at one point, my family was living on 44 cents a day. So I started with that whole, like, frugality mindset. But what I realized over time, especially meeting someone like Bryce, who didn't really grew up in more normal middle-class circumstances, is that frugality is good in that the scarcity mindset helps you with a lot of, like, understanding finances, knowing that money is precious, and not just, like, whenever you have a problem, just throw money at the problem. I didn't have that advantage when I was a child. But then over time, we realized that it has to be a combination of learning, lessons from growing up in poverty, as well as lessons from middle class and rich, to understand how to make money with money. And that frugality cannot be the only thing that you use, because it can only go so far. Like, at a certain point, it turns into hoarding. And then you just, like, never spend any money. You put all your money into a savings account, which is actually losing money to inflation. So frugality helps up to a certain point. But at a certain point later on, you end up, like, what is the point of deprivation for the rest of your life? And so one of the things we discovered that was really helpful, which we never would have thought in a million years, is that travel is actually helpful in that you are living like a 5-star luxurious life for half the amount of money you would have spent living in an expensive city back home in Toronto. So one of the things we did after retiring is that we decided to take a trip around the world. And we thought it was just going to be, okay, let's just take a gap year. We never had that. Let's just take a gap year, and then we'll go back to Canada and find a cheap city to live, because we no longer need to work in Toronto, and see what happens. And then lo and behold, we came back and we ended up spending $40,000 a year. I was expecting to spend $100,000, $75,000 to $100,000, because we all been trained to think that vacations are expensive and traveling is expensive, but it's actually the opposite. So it turns out that you can live a really good life without, just using frugality and deprivation as the way to actually get to FI. So
it's because of the cost of living. And when she says $40,000, that's for the entire year. And the reason why that's really significant for us is that was how much we were planning on retiring in Canada. Yeah. So when we realized that was true, that means, like, oh, hey, we can just do this forever. And the key to that is something that's called geographic arbitrage, which is you can spend time in expensive places like Switzerland, like the UK, like France and whatnot. But if you then then you just average out the time spent in lower cost countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, the pig economies, as you guys call it, or even like Southeast Asia, where everything is like everyone just kind of like a big step down from European prices because they're not on the euro and this kind of stuff. I mean, like if you took pounds and then translated them into Vietnamese dong, you're like a bajillionaire instantly, right? And you're like, whoa. It's really really funny on our travels when we see, because like we're Canadian, and then when we travel in Southeast Asia, things are really, really cheap for us. But in our head, we're converting from Canadian dollars to whatever the local currency is. When Brits travel, they're doing it from pound sterling to whatever. And for them, it's just kind of like, how much was this meal? I don't know, 50p. It's like, Jesus Christ. It's just like, it is like
everything is free.
Everything, like it just feels free for them.
Yeah.
So the effect is even more pronounced for you guys because you guys are on the pound.
Yeah.
But what we then realized, one of the most mind-boggling things that we realized, it is not about frugality. By using travel and then spending more time in lower cost countries, you can earn and save in one country and then retire and spend in another country. And when you do that, you can actually live a more luxurious life. You can increase your quality of life while actually reducing the cost at the same time, which isn't supposed to actually happen. But here we are, right? I mean, like it's kind of a magical force when you kind of figure it out.
It's like hacking your life.
It really
is.
It's
like a chess game.
Yeah. And you get to spend time in beautiful places, like Southeast Asia at very low cost. So that's the other benefit.
Right.
It's not just the financial benefit; it's the life benefit.
Sure. And one of the things we realized is that there's actually a lot of places in the world that are very underrated. So a lot of people end up going to London, Paris, New York. And then what we ended up doing was it wasn't just Southeast Asia that was really good value. We found really good value in Poland, in Eastern Europe, like Estonia, in Latvia, and places that other people would have never thought to visit because everybody's in, like Italy or expensive places like Amsterdam. And so we actually split our time. Last year, we had like a German visa that allowed us to stay in Europe for a year. So we were actually able to split our time between Eastern Europe, Poland, and then expensive places like Amsterdam and even going to Iceland. And we still only spent $40,000, even though we were in Europe pretty much the entire year. So it's just like mind-boggling how many different places you can go to. Like we didn't know Portugal was a really good place that had fantastic value. A lot of expats actually go there. A lot of digital nomads go there. So just this crazy thing that you don't realize until you actually get out of the bubble of work, and then you start looking around and realizing, hey, I don't need to be frugal in order to actually live this lifestyle. I can live a luxurious lifestyle for a lot less. It's just everybody thinks how much things are supposed to cost is, how much the things cost around them. But when you actually get out of that bubble, it's like, that's not how much things are supposed to cost at all.
And the portfolio supporting all of this, you mentioned you made a decision to move away from saving up for $1 million property to redirecting that. So what is the portfolio that's backing all this up?
Sure. So it's a portfolio that anyone can build, and it's made out of index funds, index tracking ETFs, and we just kind of hold a plain vanilla with some tweaks and modifications, a 60-40 portfolio where 60 equity, 40% fixed income, or bonds, and then the equity part is just kind of split evenly between Canada, US, and Europe. So it's kind of like a world, just kind of like split amongst the world in terms of the major developed countries' equity markets, and that's kind of pretty much it. It's a little bit more. There's a little bit added more complexity, and we talk about that more in detail on our blog and in the book. But that's pretty much it, and that's kind of really all you need. It's because instead of investing in individual stocks, which is what we thought that's investing in the stock market is, it's supposed to be betting on Nestle and like these companies and Facebook and seeing whether they go up or down. If you buy indexes, you're kind of buying all stocks at once, and as a result, it protects you. It has this natural protection against downside because it can never crash to zero. An individual stock can crash to zero, but the only way an index, which holds all companies in a market cap weighted way, can crash to zero is if all companies crash to zero. At which point, aliens have invaded, and it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't
matter. Whoever has the most shotgun shells wins at that point, right?
Yeah.
So we realize the big weakness of real estate is. And when we say real estate, we're talking about living in a house or an apartment as a primary real estate, and then just trying to use that as your retirement plan. It doesn't actually help you retire. You have to sell the entire thing in order to get any of your money out of it. you can't, as they say, take a shingle off of your roof in order to pay for today's meal. It's an all or nothing kind of thing. But what a portfolio of financial assets does is it does allow you to live off of it, because it pays you dividends, interest, and like these kinds of things. And those are the things we live off of. We don't actually advocate a strategy in retirement of selling assets, like selling ETF units in order to pay for our living expenses, because if you rely on that too much, then that means when there's a downturn, like what are you going to do? Because there's nothing that's gone up and everything's gone down. But if you instead live off of the yield, like we call it the yield shield, and of the portfolio, then you're living off of the dividends, you're living off of the interest, and maybe selling a few things, but primarily off of the dividends and interest. Then it makes your portfolio naturally kind of immune to market downturns, because when Trump does something stupid and threatens tariffs against some random country and the stock market's going to the crapper, the worst thing that you can do is sell, because the markets always recover. Like one day he's going to be gone, right? And then it'll eventually come back up. Who knows when? Hopefully sooner rather than later. But if you sell when it's temporarily down, you've locked in the losses, and then you don't have as many units to pull you back up when it does go up. But if you can avoid selling, like when you're retired, the best thing that you can do is hold and just not sell anything and wait for it to come back up. And when you're actually working, the best thing you can do is actually buy more into it, right? So it's kind of like that's kind of how we use our portfolio to live off of.
But you must have some variability in that yield. So year on year, it fluctuates in value. Do you have to adjust your lifestyle, your spending in line with that yield fluctuation?
Not really. I mean, like the yield actually gets built in when you buy, right? So yield is calculated as a percentage of the net asset value, or the current price of that ETF, and the underlying assets are paying X amount of dollars per share every quarter or every whatever. But when but that kind of gets locked in when you buy, even if it goes down, assuming that dividends don't get cut, which is actually quite rare. Even in 2008, they didn't actually get cut significantly in the US. They'll still keep paying you even if the stock market goes even if the capital value goes temporarily down. So it's actually a lot more stable than people think it is. It's not guaranteed, but it is. It's even in 2008, like yields only got cut around yields only got cut around like 10% for the overall market. Like it really wasn't that significant, and then they came right back up the next year.
And the thing is, the yield is also made up of a combination of things. Like we also have REITs, which are real estate income trusts, right? And we also have the interest from bonds. So it's like a mix of different things. You're actually diversified on that yield. It's not just like we're buying a dividend stock, one individual stock, and then we're reliant on that yield. And if it gets cut, then you're in big trouble, right? So it's diversification, not just on the portfolio assets itself, but also diversification on the yield.
Right. We get into the exact details of which ETFs and which assets and in what proportion that we use. Again, in the book and in the blog, it's kind of difficult to do this over a podcast because otherwise I'd just be reading ETF symbols out to you.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good to get the broad sort of picture of it. So someone who's listening to this conversation today and thinking, as I am, this sounds great. I'd like to retire. I'd like to spend my life traveling and experiencing all these wonderful countries and living this lifestyle. How do you get started? If you're in that position, say you're in your 20s or 30s or even later in your 40s or 50s, what are the first steps to take?
I would say get into the market as early as possible, especially for young people. The longer the runway you have in the market, the more time it has for your portfolio to grow. So one of the things we have is that we run a free workshop on our website, and that's because a lot of readers have asked for this. So we want to share as much financial knowledge as possible. So that's why it's completely free. You can actually just follow it step by step in order to build our portfolio. So that's at www.millennial-revolution.com. And you can just click on the workshop to figure out how it actually works. On top of that, within the book, we actually talk about how to pick your asset allocation in order to, because not everybody has the same risk tolerance. So basically we lay out the fundamentals so you actually understand the pillars of investing. And then in order to give you like a hands-on experience, we have the workshop that allows you to like easily follow it step by step. But definitely I would say overall, if you're young, get into the market as soon as possible, because then your time for the portfolio to grow will be much, much higher than anyone else. And over the long term, you'll get much better returns than if you just stick your money in a savings account and just losing money to inflation.
And to add to that, be very wary of debt. I mean, there's nothing more corrosive to somebody's financial picture than debt. And, bankers love to say there's good debt and there's bad debt. The reality is it's all bad debt. When you're getting into a big mortgage, and especially for you guys, where your property prices have, you guys ran out of space 600 years ago, kind of thing, right? So your property prices are even worse, more expensive, and there's even more debt involved for you guys. So be very, very wary of getting into too much debt. And then third, if you want to get started, and this one's fun, go out and start traveling more. Because when you realize that, and don't travel and don't get one of those vacation packages where everything's kind of done for you. Go fly into Thailand, live in or go into Poland, find an Airbnb, stay there for a month, and cook, and then live like a local, and then keep track of how much you spend and add it up, and I think it's gonna amaze you how little that traveling outside of your own home country actually costs. And because that's the part that really kind of woke us up a little bit, right? When we realized, travel is not a luxury, travel can actually save you money. That's when the superpower of all these factors kind of can be put together, because it's things don't cost nearly as much as you think it does. And I know for people in the UK where you're kind of used to paying £7 for a pint, that's not normal. That's not normal at all. In Portugal, I can get a 1 liter thing of wine for €1. Sometimes they're on special and it's 60 cents, and I'm like,
yeah, for £7
cheaper.
in Thailand, you can get a massage for an hour with tip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, for people who in the UK listen to this, Portugal only a couple of hours away. So it's not like this is long distance travel required either. It's relatively simple and straightforward to get started. It's been great to chat to you both. Before I let you go, how can we find out more about the book and about your work? How can we get in touch with you?
Yeah, for sure. Just go to www.quitlikeamillionaire.com. So that's the name of our book. And you can pick up the book basically anywhere in bookstores near you. And you can also check out our site, www.millennial-revolution.com, for the free workshop if you want to get started in investing.
And it's also we're on there all the time, so you can kind of get a taste for what we're about, what our lifestyle is about, which is awesome. Yeah. I have to say, 5 out of 5 stars, says the guy doing it. And so let's chat, and we'd love to hear from you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll make sure I put links in the show notes to the website and the workshop and the book, so our listeners can find all of those nice and easily too. But it's been great to chat. Thank you so much for your time.
No problem. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you to Kristy and Bryce for joining us today on Informed Choice Radio. Do check out their book. It's called Quit Like a Millionaire. No gimmicks, luck, or trust fund required. I'll put links to the book and also to their websites in the show notes for this episode at icradio.co.uk. Would you like to hear more from members of the FIRE movement on this podcast? Let me know via our website, or you can message me on Twitter at Martin Bamford. Until next time, I'm Martin Bamford, and this is Informed Choice Radio. And remember, when it comes to your money, the more you know, the faster it can grow.